What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Today, it's round 4 with Mr. Matt Laslo at Ascapol. How's it going, Matt? How's it been?
Oh, miserable because I cover Congress, but that's on me. The election years
Okay,
are taking years off my life.
so as far as I understand, you're going on the trail over the next couple of days, aren't you? What's that going to be like? What do you expect?
Let's see. I'll be traveling through, I think, Pennsylvania, New York, and then going up to New Hampshire. um, so we will see what the people are thinking. But the election here is right around the corner. So a lot of tomfoolery happening.
Are you going to take some of that time to, because I know it's going to be like a campaign trail, but do you take some of that time to ask questions about UAP to any congressperson you see, or do you separate the two things one from each other?
If it comes up, we'll see. For the New York races, I've already interviewed Alexandria Ocasio Cortez or AOC about it because she's working on some of those upstate races. And then I already talked to Senator Gillibrand about those races when Congress was in session. And so those are two who I usually ask about UAPs. So if I end up being at an event where they're there, then yeah, I'll bring it up. But most of the time, I'll just like be a fly on the wall. If someone brings it up in the audience, boom, when it's done, I'm gonna beeline it over to them. But usually, because I'm a feature writer, I just like to be a fly on the wall, yeah, and just see what people are talking about. But we'll see, because members have said that they're hearing a lot about this issue this cycle, which they haven't in the past. So maybe it'll come up.
It's mostly thanks to people like you, dude, to be honest with you. Because I wanted to ask you though, recently there were some mix-ups with some of the reporting from a couple of our colleagues who said that the UAPDA was dead in the water. But then you came out with that rounds exclusive, which changed the tune again. What's your feeling on how the UAPDA is right now? Is it really dead, or do you see some kind of movement behind the scenes?
Well, that's where, and so Senator Mike Rounds, he's a Republican from South Dakota. He's the lead Republican co author with Schumer on the UAPDA. And it's interesting. I need to look up, or I need to ask them why, what happened this time. But it's interesting. Last year, Schumer was the lead sponsor of it. This year, Rounds is the lead sponsor. And I'm kind of curious if that's not because people targeted it because it had Schumer's name last time. He's the Senate Majority Leader, so he's got a target on his back. And so I'm kind of curious if they changed it up and said, hey, Rounds, like, you be the lead sponsor this time. It might take some heat off. So I need to explore that. But what Rounds told me was like, hey, basically, because there's so much dysfunction in Congress, they didn't go through the normal channels. And like last year for the NDAA, they had that like 3 or 4 hour long public meeting, which was the public conference committee, where this gets a little nerdy, but this is just like basics for Congress. You have like the Senate, and then you have the House. If the House passes their own bill and the Senate passes their own bill, then the two chambers have to meet in what's called a conference committee and hash out their differences. They come to an agreement, then both chambers have to pass that final version. Well, because Congress is spending this whole year campaigning instead of actually legislating, that kind of seems to have given new life to the UAPDA. Because even though it wasn't formally included in either of the measures, because this is now being negotiated in secret, and I mean, maybe it's not even being negotiated right now because Congress is out there campaigning and just focused on November's election. This whole issue might not even be discussed until after the election. So that's where the few members or the few staffers who are still focused on it right now, they're like super empowered, for better and for worse, when it comes to democracy and all that. And so that's where Rounds is saying, hey, talks are still alive on our UAPDA. And he's kind of hoping that once they start negotiating a little more intensely, after the election, he was kind of saying that, like, hey, we're making some progress, and he thinks they might be able to get it in, but he's not banking on it per se. He's just holding out that little sliver of hope. So we shall see.
I was wondering though, what do you think about because there's some people from the DoD or scientists who work for the government who have come out either in books or in statements on interviews said that, for example, Dr. Jim Lakatsky, who said that in one of his books, he said that he got into one of these craft and he seems to have a lot of information from the inside from one of these programs. Dr. Hal Puthoff just came out on the program from James Fox, alluding that he has access to the program. I was wondering though, because you're an expert in Congress and you could tell me, because I've always wondered this, could you get like a subpoena or something like that to get those people in front of Congress to testify? Or do you think there's like a way they can avoid getting subpoenaed?
That's where, with this issue in particular, as of yet, the UAP caucus, the Congressional UAP caucus, hasn't had subpoena power because they don't have their own committee. And that's kind of why there's been that debate amongst lawmakers on whether, initially they were asking for their own select UAP committee. Well, then you also had, then there was chatter of, hey, let's just have our own select subcommittee, as a part of the broader oversight committee. And so there's been some disagreement on what to even ask for within the UAP caucus. But if they had, especially their own committee, then yeah, they would have subpoena power. Oversight committee does have subpoena power, but the whole committee would have to vote. And usually, like we've seen it fairly partisan in recent years. So, like when the oversight committee is doing its Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, like impeachment investigation, they've subpoenaed some folks, but those are, hyper partisan, so just Republicans voting. And so because for the leaders of that committee that this issue hasn't like risen to the top of their radar, I don't see any of them like being willing to cut subpoenas yet or even like move for a full vote on that. But if you got to the point where you had different agencies or whatever stonewalling this investigation, that's where I could see a bipartisan group going to leaders and saying, hey, we've got to subpoena this person because, we've invited them in to talk, but they're refusing, and we think they have key information. So again, it hasn't risen to that level, but they, in theory, could.
So essentially, we would need to like have like a more tense kind of situation where someone would be like, "These guys are not giving us anything," so that can be that can happen. Okay, I
Yeah,
see.
and like a good example, we kind of saw that with the Select January 6th committee investigating that January 6th, 2021 attack on the Capitol. That committee, like, it would send out requests, and then you had a couple people refuse those requests. Well, so then they sent out subpoenas, and that's why Steve Bannon is spending time in jail right now, and I think it's why that other person, I forget his name, but why he was in jail a little bit for a few months because they refused those subpoenas.
Roger
So
Stone,
yeah, no, I don't think it was Stone
he
this
wasn't
time.
in
It was the
jail,
other
no?
old guy. I think he
Okay.
was in jail for something else, but he might have been in jail for this.
You did ask recently it was Burleson, right? He alluded to some secret names of whistleblowers that he already knew one. Have you gotten anything new from that?
No, but yeah, last we talked to him, and it's up at askapol.com. Burleson. Oh, so it was funny because the first he had heard about the November 13th UAP hearing in the House was from me, from us at Askapol. And so he was like, "Oh, we have a hearing date." He's like, "I got the name." I guess what he said to us is that someone leaked him a name, and it sounds like he's like talked to that person and now has a relationship with him, or maybe he doesn't. But it sounded like he kind of vetted him and he trusts him, And so he was going to put that name in to the chair, Nancy Mace, and then also members of the UAP caucus to try to get that witness. And it'll be interesting because Nancy Mace, it seems like she's already got either a veteran, it sounds like, or maybe an active duty member that she wants there. And then the UAP caucus, they've got someone that they want. And so then the minority will get to pick someone. And so we'll see if Burleson gets that name in on time. But that just kind of shows that, it's an election year. The UAP caucus is still young and still sometimes running in different directions. So it'll be interesting to see where they go and who they decide on to actually become those witnesses for that public hearing.
Because, for example, last year, I know that people like Jeremy Corbell or George Knapp were more involved in picking the names who were going to be testifying. And we got David Grush, we got David Fravor, and Ryan Graves. Have you seen any activity from these people that are like more UFO bigwigs or figures within the community who have been like involved? Have you seen them, spotted them in the halls of Congress trying to get like whistleblowers or anything like that?
So not that I know of, but I know that some of those folks are more active, and especially because Arrow has kind of failed, and because a lot of, because Arrow was set up to be the repository for Congress on these issues. The fact that whistleblowers don't trust Arrow, a lot of those whistleblowers who would have been going to Arrow have been knocking on the doors of lawmakers, being like, hey, we don't trust this group, but I have this story to tell. So I think there's been some facilitation in that, but it sounds like lawmakers have had a lot more direct contact with a lot of these folks. Even it was interesting. Lou Elizondo, before he was out on his book tour, I guess he went and talked to the whole Republican Study Committee, which is, or maybe it was the Conservative Opportunity Society. But we broke that news with Ralph Norman, South Carolina Republican. He's not a member of the UAP caucus, but he was like, hey, we just had this briefing from this Elizondo guy, and he's like, this guy was brilliant, he's really tracking. And so that's where there's been some of these meetings that, we're not privy to in the media, but they've been going on. And so it seems like a lot of these lawmakers have lists of folks that they'd like to hear from publicly if they're willing, but otherwise they're helping them form, deeper knowledge on these subjects. So hopefully their questions can be pointy like arrows.
How long ago was this when Luke went to DC? That was like 2 months ago, something like that, right?
Yeah, it was a few months ago that he met with Elizondo in that group. And then I think he's been here since. But again, a lot of those meetings are just private, kind of helping lawmakers, gain more knowledge. And so we'll see if, what that looks like, how that materializes when it comes
You
to
see, I am asking this because, as you know, one of your questions to Representative Carson went viral and it did a lot of damage, quote unquote. And I was wondering if maybe it was possible because the initial question was asked from Matt Ford to Lou Elizondo, one of his interviews, about this, alluding to something happening in Congress. And what I was told is that people within Congress, I wasn't told it was Congress people, but maybe Congress staffers who were being briefed about this in unclassified settings, but it was still like confidential briefings. And I was wondering if maybe that could be possible. You told me you've asked more people from Congress and they've all said no, right? About the James Webb stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I haven't found a person yet who's publicly said they've been at one of those briefings, and all of them have said no, no, no. But the interesting thing about Andre Carson is his response was, I can't answer that. And he's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So as far as what I've been able to report is that, you know, no existence of any meetings or briefings yet. But I'm going to keep fishing around.
Do you think that maybe Carson said just no comment just because he was like in a hurry or something like that? Or how do you read that response from him? Because everybody has their own interpretation, right? What was
Yeah.
yours?
Well, so with Carson, I never read too much into a no comment, but it keeps that mystery alive. And so, no comment is just that. He was, if I remember right, that was kind of the last question I asked. And so he was walking up to vote on the House floor. And so he goes past this barrier that says like members only past that. And so I remember I was stopped at that rope. And so it could have been him being like, no comments. I'm in a hurry to go vote, but he wasn't that rushed. But he's been more delicate. Even in the past, there's been things that members of the UAP caucus would be talking on the record to me about that he'll then say no comment. Just because it kind of feels like he holds himself to a little bit of a higher standard. But maybe he also just uses no comment as a way of just saying, hey, I don't have any information on that. You know, no comment. Like, hey, let's move past. So he's a hard one to peg, and I don't read too much into that comment. Um, it's interesting seeing online people are being like, "Oh, see, there's a there," but I'm like, no, no, no. He just said no comment.
Yeah.
Um, but now it's our job to find out if there's a there.
And what was the aftermath of that though? Because it went pretty wild. Like I was even snoped. Like I was on Snopes, and you got saved from that, but you didn't do anything wrong, really. Not neither did I don't think I said that this was happening. I just said that this was something that was being told to people in Congress, but people took it out of context. What was your experience like?
Well, I didn't have much, but that's interesting. What did Snopes say? Did they vote
Snopes
it
just
down?
said that I was not a reliable source, and which I'm really not. I'm just a journalist, I'm not like a scientist or anything, just reporting on shit. But it was weird that someone took a piece of the clip and just like ran with it as if I was saying it was happening. Well, so I was like the biggest doomer in the world for like a few hours. That wasn't fun.
Yeah. No, and that's where, especially, and people need to remember, just overall, a part of the difficulty with this issue and covering it on Capitol Hill is that, for the most part, a lot of this stuff is classified. And so
Yeah.
when you have members coming in and out of the skiff briefings, someone like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, her rule leaving a skiff briefing is that even though she's always talking to the media, even though she's like not afraid of us at all, like she uses us to get her name out there, to do fundraising and all that. It's when she leaves the skiff that she's just like, I'm not talking about anything. Just that's kind of a good personal rule to have, because those members, when they're in the skiffs, they kind of sign away their life, and it's like, hey, anything that comes up in there is classified, even if that same information, they could have had a hearing on it the day before and it was unclassified. And so that's where, because they, sign basically their life away and say, hey, if I divulge any of this information, I can go to prison for it. And so that's where, again, Carson, he might have been in a briefing where someone asked about James Webb. And so he's like, oh, I just can't even talk about it. But yeah, it came up in a briefing. And so that's where it was interesting seeing people come to like definitive conclusions, because I'm like, what? He didn't say anything definitive. He didn't,
No, he didn't.
no comments. It's just that. It's no
Yeah.
comments. And so, yeah, he's opaque, but kind of on purpose.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you though about something that's come up lately, especially after Lou's book came out, because that dude gets a lot of attacks. And I've seen that some people like see the work that we do and see that we're like trying to talk to people from both sides of an issue, and they immediately like have a problem with us for doing that, and they lump us into a category where like, dude, I'm just doing my job, I'm not trying to pick sides or anything. What is your sense of that? Why do you think that keeps happening, especially within the UFO community? Because I know you've been accused of stuff that you haven't done. You're just doing your job as a journalist. What is your read on that polarized feeling within the community?
Well, broadly speaking, it seems like, well, because sometimes what we have is people have their mind totally made up, and when they have their mind totally made up, one way or the other, because you have some skeptics who are 1,000,000,000% certain that there's no there there. And so then sometimes you put out, and then especially what we do at askapol.com is we're just dropping the raw interviews. And so the next day we might have a different interview, telling a different side of that story. Um, but just because we're small and don't have the bandwidth, sometimes it just takes time for us to get that other information out there, or for us to even be able to have the bandwidth to go and, find that other person. Because people really dumped on us, especially, I don't even say his name, but when we were told by someone who I really trust that, hey, Matt Gaetz and Luna are saying that they were in a briefing and they were shown bodies. So we reported that because when we interviewed uh, Luna, I think she said, no comment, I can't talk about that. Well, so then, again, the community blew up and was like, whoa, she can't talk on this. She's not denying it. Well, so then I went over to the Senate side and found Senator Martin Heinrich, who's on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and kind of like pushed him a little bit. And he's like, yeah, I've never been in a briefing where there's anything remotely close to like recovered bodies being shown. And so that's where sometimes, me changing the way I'm asking the questions and then even going outside of that chamber and asking it in a roundabout way, I was able to get him to kind of debunk that. And so I think that's where, especially because this community hasn't had a reporter on Capitol Hill until like the last year when I started doing it, um, there's a lot of information and stuff in the community that just doesn't seem like Congress is taking it up yet, whether to, address it and find truth there or whether to use their resources and debunk it. And so that's where I think as Congress is kind of coming into its own on this issue, we're starting to see them get a lot more information, but then also the more information they get, the more they're able to question and debunk other things, or pull those strings and be like, hey, it feels like there is a there, and so I think, especially with what we do at Askapol, our hands are only kind of tied by the questions that they're asking, because we're not allowed inside the skiff, we don't know what they're hearing, and so that's where we're constantly taking what little bits of information we get here, what little bits we get here, and tossing them at lawmakers. And like the way I view lawmakers in general, like I don't think the answers lie within Congress, and I don't really think they ever will. You might, in the next few years, see Congress really get stout on this and really, devote more resources to it. Maybe start a select committee, and then they might start getting answers. But where they're always going to be looking for answers is within the executive branch. That's just the nature of it and how our government works. And so what we also have is different members with different levels of knowledge. And so that's why I never look at one lawmaker as like, oh, what they say is like the voice of God, like they have the truth, because there's 535 members of Congress. And so each one of them is going to be constrained just by their own limitations as just a singular subjective human being. There's only like so much that they could be exposed to. But then also, there's only so many questions that they'll be asking, and that's kind of the power of the U.S. system, is that through these checks and balances, you, for one, keep the other branches in check, but you also gain a little bit more knowledge through having that process slowed down. And that's kind of where the congressional committees come in, where someone who's not on one of those powerful committees, especially the Intel Committee or Armed Services Committee that have more uh, top secret security clearance or whatever, you can still have folks with knowledge outside of those, but the folks on that committee, they might have the most knowledge, but then they might not be able to talk about it because it's in a classified setting. And so that's where you can kind of use those other members to sometimes get information from those folks that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Have you gotten any clues based on the election that is coming on whether the topic is going to go stronger depending on who wins? Have you got any clues of that? Because I've seen the Democrats slightly more quiet about all of this stuff than compared to the Republicans, even though it's a bipartisan issue still. But what are the clues that you've gotten so far leading up to the election?
So, yeah, to a degree, for the most part, the issue's been able to stay mostly nonpartisan. But it's been interesting because over in the Senate, it's Democratic Senator Gillibrand who's kind of like the only one really investigating it, and she wants to have that public hearing this fall, bringing in Arrow and having them, um, you know, tell the public how they identify crafts, how they don't, and how, like, some of the shortfalls and why they've failed to identify some. And so in the House, you did have a little bit more politics inserted into it. Um, so, like in the Senate, that's going to be interesting after the election because, for one, Gillibrand wants to bring attention to it when not many senators really care about this issue, which we know because at Askapol, I went and I interviewed all 100 of them last year on the issue. And there was just a handful that even took it seriously. Um, but one thing we're going to see, it's pretty much guaranteed that Adam Schiff, who used to be the top Democrat on the, or he was chair of HIPSCI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, he is now running for Senate. The way that race, like his primary was kind of like the general election, he won that. Now he's against the Republican who doesn't really stand a chance at all. So he's basically guaranteed a slot in the Senate. That's interesting from day one because he was the chair when Andre Carson held that first UAP UFO hearing in like 50 years back in 2022. And so now having Schiff, who's like got questions on this issue, I don't know if he's totally read up on it, but it's been something that he's cared about, unlike other members of that committee. And so it'll be interesting to see his voice added to the Senate. I don't know how much of a game changer that'll be, especially initially, because senators have 6-year terms. So usually the first couple of years, they're just like watching, learning the ropes, staying quiet, and then they start to flex in their third or fourth year. So we'll see what happens there. But I think even just having someone like Schiff, who's known because he was one of the impeachment managers for one of Trump's impeachments, I think he's going to give some more stature to this issue from day one when he comes to the Senate. Over in the House, we'll see. You guys might lose some allies in the UAP caucus. Some of them might not be coming back to Congress. We'll see then who they're replaced by. There's been a couple people running who've told me, kind of privately for now, because they don't want the issue to dominate their races, but they've been like, hey, if I'm elected, I'd love to join the UAP caucus. So I don't think we're really going to know until the dust starts to settle on the election, November 5th, when voting is and when the election's supposed to be done. But usually it takes 5 days to a week, sometimes a couple
It's pretty
weeks.
wild that
Jury.
8 days, only 8 days after the election, we're gonna get a hearing. That's pretty wild, right? About UFOs.
It, it is. And yeah, and that's one that I'm watching to see whether those members become a little more unencumbered um, with the election in their rear view, or because they'll all be jockeying for power in the new dynamics, whether politics get inserted into it. And so we'll see. I think they wanted it after the election to kind of take the politics out of it. And so we'll see.
I've been
That's
meaning
one
to
where I'm,
ask you
I'm not
though.
making predictions. Yeah.
I've been meaning to ask you about something specific because we've seen people like more high in power, like the deputy director for the National Intelligence Office. He recently came out on a podcast talking about UAP, how he was denied to be briefed, and only the director was allowed there. Then we got like Harold Malmgren, who used to be an advisor for Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, I think. People like high up. Have you ever thought about asking Congress people that seem like more uninterested on the topic, like take this approach to like say, hey, this, and this said the UFOs may be real or maybe are real, or what do you think about that? Have you thought about that before?
I haven't yet. What I've kind of been doing the past year, especially since David Grush dropped his claims on Congress, it's kind of filling out like, all right, who takes him serious? Who's like even listening to him? Because you have so many members who just like write it off, um, wrote him off just from day one. Their eyes roll. So those members suck up a lot of my time, or they would suck up a lot of my time if I was just having to explain to them, like, hey, this is what's going on. So that's where, especially because there's so many members who are engaged on the topic, going to them um, has made sense because they've been looking for information. They just like uh, had a seat at the table, or have been carving their own table out of stone in some cases. And so seeing that there's already a group of active lawmakers who care about this, who have been asking questions, it just feels like they're the ones who are most worthy of our time. Because so many members, you bring up the issue, even like powerful members, like what the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, um, Mr. Smith from Washington State. Last time I asked him about this issue, I think right ahead of the August recess, he was like, "Wait, what are UAPs again?" And
Yeah,
so
I heard that.
I've had that a lot of that with members just not even knowing um, what the new government
Yeah.
phraseology is. And
And
so
in some
that's where I'm like,
cases, you're like, I've been waiting 20 minutes for this. What the hell?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Sometimes two
Oh man.
weeks, and then you
Yeah.
get that
Um,
member, especially the powerful ones, and they're like, "What? What are you even talking about?" And then it can get disheartening, but that's where you just like
yeah.
go to other members and try to get the information.
I have like a final question, but it's gonna be a little long one, I think, because there's been a lot of activity in regards to the mummies. We know that Mausan just went to Tim Burchett and he got him to agree to get some money from taxpayers to take a look at some of the bodies at the body farm in Tennessee. Um, I don't know if you had any contact with people who are dealing with this topic specifically, either from Mexico or from Congress. Um, what do you think about the topic in general? Because you don't really ask questions about that though, but the way this is going, it seems like maybe Congress people in the US are going to start paying more attention to this. What do you think about it?
I think that's one where maybe I tried because like the hard part is each lawmaker, they've usually got at least in the House, they'll have like 2 or 3 committees that they serve on. Um, Unless they're a little higher up in seniority, then they might have one, but then they might be, a subcommittee chair where they have a lot underneath their purview. Over in the Senate, each senator has like usually 2, 3, sometimes even 4 committees that are, like the bulk of their workload. And so with that, you have lawmakers who already are bifurcated. They're pulled in every different direction. Like, and if you're a U.S. senator, you have military bases in your state. You have schools in your state. Roads and bridges. So there's all these things. Like everything that happens in that state is on that U.S. senator's plate. They can't just be like, oh, I don't know about that flood. They have to be attentive to it. And so that's where it's been interesting to see it pop onto Senator Gillibrand's radar, and onto her plate. We haven't really seen that with a lot of other lawmakers over there. And so in the House, because this issue hasn't, doesn't have a committee, one main committee of jurisdiction, kind of been seeing these members go out of their way to cleave power and say, no, this is our issue. So then when it comes to like headlines out of South America, a lot of distant things coming from Peru, lawmakers are just like, what? They're not even up on the domestic coverage of the issue, in part because there isn't a ton. And so I think slowly them and their staffers are reading up more on this issue, especially when stuff's happening overseas. But when I asked, 4 or 5, maybe 6, even UAP caucus members, hey, have you read Lou Elizondo's book? None of them had yet. Some like might be picking it up in October because Congress is gone. But that's where, even getting them to be read up on domestic coverage of the issue is sometimes hard. And so, especially when it comes to headlines happening abroad, that's like next to impossible. But I think that could change. And especially with folks, legislators from other nations kind of watching what the U.S. is doing now, I think that those dynamics might change in the near future.
And what is your take on the whole thing? Do you have an opinion on it? Not at
I
all.
haven't I haven't read enough or seen enough, and it just hasn't been one of the top issues here in the U.S. domestically, which again could change. But
Yeah.
I haven't heard any lawmakers come
Okay.
down
Had
one
to
way or
ask
the other.
though. Had to ask
Yep.
though. I wanted to ask you though, just uh from now until November the 5th or the 6th, you're just gonna be focused only on the election. You're not gonna be focused on unless something comes up, as you told me. But what's it gonna be? Where are the towns that you're gonna hit? What's it gonna be like before you leave? Just let the people know.
Well, and so because I knew Congress is going to be gone all of October, we're still going to be having fresh content dropping at askapol.com. Um, I don't know if I'll be getting new fresh content for that, but yeah, this Friday, maybe Thursday, I'll hit the campaign trail and I'll just drive from here in DC. Might stop in Maryland a little bit, but maybe not. But then I'll go to Pennsylvania, New York, and then New Hampshire because some of these like really small house races could that are off a lot of people's radars. They really could decide who's in power in the House starting in January, and so I will be going and hounding these folks. I'm also curious about what election workers are doing because now they're getting threats, and I'm curious about some of the misinformation and stuff happening on the ground. Um, so yeah, it's the election's right around the corner. November 5th is coming quickly. Um, so yeah, it'll be a busy next few weeks.
We'll be watching you. And by the time that hearing comes up, I'll hit you up again to see what impressions you can give us from whatever happens there. And watching, see who comes up as a new whistleblower or to testify. But where can people find you, Matt? Thank you for your time, though.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So check us out at askapol.com. Um, Subscriptions are free, and you can listen to all of our audio, our exclusives with different members of Congress. They're all free. But if you care about what we're doing, we're independent journalists. Paid subscription really goes a long way. And I think right now we have a 30% off deal going. So, yeah, find us at askapol.com. We've got a community chat that you can be a part of for our subscribers. And I love it because that's where I get a lot of the questions that I'll just like see a conversation in that community chat, and then I'll see a lawmaker and I'll just ask straight from the chat. So, yeah, become a part of our community, and we enjoy having you as a part of our community, brother.
And Matt does ask the questions you tell him to. I'm the great example of it, how that went down. So thank you, Matt, for everything you do, man, and good luck on the campaign trail. I'll
Yes,
see you
sir.
soon. Okay, so be safe.
You know it. Yes,
All right,
sir. Appreciate you.
have a good one, folks. Thank you.